I've been an investigator for 15 years now for the Department of the Environment. I'm not a private eye sort of investigator, but I'm really a trained eye looking for historic buildings. Here in Hartsop, I'm listing buildings of architectural and historic interest and grading them, either 1 or 2. This is the kind of house I really like very much, you know. It's typical of the Lake District and especially of Patterdale. And it's a typical plan here of the long rectangle with the house and all the farm buildings in one long, simple rectangle. They weren't built for the view, they were built purely for practical purposes. Now, this is another Grade 2 building, you see, and also probably 17th century like the other one. It has the 2 special features of the Lake District, the external stone staircase, and also the spinning gallery, which is very special. That you don't meet that in other parts of the country. Now, this is a corn drying kiln. You see, it's built on the hillside so that it has 2 stories. At the bottom here, they would put the fuel, probably peat or something slow burning, and then up on the top they would spread out the oats. This is Grade 2 because it's typical of late medieval style of building in this district, and it's relatively unaltered, with local features such as a circular chimney and an enclosed circular stair. It's not Grade 1 because it's not so terribly rare in this area. Well, this is Hartsop Hall, which is the biggest house of the hamlet of Hartsop. It's not very large compared with other manor houses of the rest of the country. You see the thickness of the wall here. It's probably about 4 feet thick, and built on huge boulders as a base, large cobbled, rough-hewn stone. This is a 16th century wall here, the 16th century window with the curved mullion, the curved moulding here, and the typical round-headed window, which is very charming, and it always would be whitewashed to keep the weather out again. Because of the completeness of the front here and its beautiful 16th century windows, this would be a Grade 1 building. Now here we see the 17th century barn that was added to the 16th century house, and this is the 18th century wing that was added later. And here it's very obviously a working farm, and in fact it was the first working farm that was given to the National Trust. But the National Trust, of course, has nothing to do with the Department of the Environment. It's simply a private owner like any other, and it doesn't make any difference to me in my investigation. When I'm typing my lists, I refer to my notes, which brings back in my mind's eye the appearance of the house, and then I can very often recollect it. And then for village centres, I have 25-inch to the mile maps, and I have to mark each separate building. The owners and occupiers are informed that they must not demolish their house without previous permission from the planning authority, and also the local authorities are informed. Both my parents were practical people. Mother was a dressmaker, father was an engineer. I was brought up just after the First War, and father was out of work all my childhood, and he taught me, before I went to school even, to handle tools and make things with Meccano sets, so that I was always building. And I always wanted to be an architect because I wanted to build things. I would go up to the little parish church at Heysham and measured it with my school ruler and drew the plans, as father had taught me to do, and made a little model of it in cardboard, and then painted the outside so that it was accurate for the architecture. I left school at 15, and when I said I wanted to be an architect, people just said, well, don't be silly, girls aren't architects. And they weren't in those days. So I went in for art instead. and went through the whole art course at the art school, including a teaching diploma, by which time the Second World War had come, and so I drifted into teaching. I taught until 1948, and then increasingly it was borne in on me that it really wasn't the career that I could last a lifetime in. I wanted to do something constructive and creative. I felt at 30, well, it's time I did it and fulfilled what was in me, and not just stick in a job because it was safe and had a pension. So I decided to take the plunge and give up teaching and scrape up my savings and find digs in London and go and study at the Courtauld Institute. I found a cheap little bedsitter, but it meant going without food very often. So it was a very hard job, both mentally and physically, to go back and start again at 30. And also not knowing what job it would lead to. Then out of the blue I got a letter from Nicholas Pevsner asking if I would be interested in doing research for him on his Buildings of England series. And I worked with him for 4 years. My parents were getting elderly then and ailing, and I felt really it was about time I came home and did something to look after them a bit more. So the Ministry of Housing wanted an investigator for historic buildings in the north of England. So I applied and got the job. My job is to visit every single building in this area up to the Scottish border. The majority of buildings are Grade 2, which means that they can't be altered or demolished without reference to Whitehall. About 5% of the listed buildings are Grade 1. These have the maximum protection because they're so outstanding. And I think everybody would agree that Levens Hall should be Grade 1. The earliest part of the house was the 14th century peel tower, which was built as a defence against the cattle raiders, the people who could live in the upper stories of the tower and put their cattle in the ground floor there for protection. And then as times became more settled, they built on a comfortable mansion, in the Elizabethan times actually. But they did add at different times later, including the 19th century, when a wing was added at the rear. This also has a very beautiful garden here of topiary work, which is very famous. When I'd been working for some years here, I joined the local Society of Friends, and they asked me one summer if I would give a little talk to some children. And in charge of a group from Cheshire was a very charming man. And after the talk, we had tea together. Then he wrote to me. Of course, that started a correspondence. Our friendship grew and grew, and it was the perfect match. And being retired, he was able to come out with me on my job. If my husband hadn't been with me, it could have been a very lonely job, as it is now, of course, now that I'm a widow. Northumberland is a very different kind of county. It's a county of big scale, large sweeping landscapes, big skies, large houses and big parks. Because it's unprotected by any physical barriers, there was a long history of raids over the border, of cattle raids and sheep raids. And a town like Berwick had to be very well fortified, of course. Well, that's nothing unusual. There are other fortified towns in the country from the 13th century onwards, but Berwick's unique because it had fortifications, a town wall built in the middle of the 16th century. And it's unique in Northern Europe for being so well preserved. These are ancient monuments. They're not my province because I only deal with habitable buildings. The bastions are a special feature of the walls here. That was the invention in Italy in the 16th century, so that they could put guns on these bastions which would fire along the length of the walls, which was something different. Previously they could only fire outwards. Morning, that's a lovely house you've got there, or has been.
Yes.
Are they going to ask for a grant to do it up?
Oh, yes. Yes, they are.
Yes, it is possible.
They'll need to see because we run too much for the local
Yes.
people.
Yes, it must have been empty quite some time to get in that
Yes.
state. Well, it would make rather nice flats or offices, wouldn't it?
Probably flats or like a hostel of some kind, I should imagine.
Yes. It's often very difficult, of course, to know what to do with a historic building that's outlived its original purpose. This is the barracks in Berwick, which was built in 1719, an early date. In fact, it's the earliest barracks in the country that was built purposely as barracks. It was very large and very luxurious for its time. And it's now become a regimental museum for the King's Own Scottish Borderers, so that ensures its continuing use. Because a building is listed doesn't mean that it's preserved just as it is forever and ever and must never be altered or touched in any way. I don't regard buildings as museum pieces in themselves. They're meant to serve a purpose for modern generations and to be there for future generations to enjoy. That is a very important part of my work. That's the whole point of the work, that we should keep something for the future to enjoy and use. There's a cafe, for instance, now in the ground floor of the town hall, which used to be the market, and it forms a very popular meeting place now in the very centre of Berwick. Some of the former open arches have been filled in, and that part is now a shop. On the first floor there's still the council chamber, and on the upper floor what was the prison is now a little museum. The parish church of Berwick was forbidden to have a tower by Cromwell, so the Victorians added this little turret. It's one of only two in the country built in the time of Cromwell. The Venetian window dates it pretty well to the middle of the 17th century. I have to do quite a bit of detective work in dating buildings very often. I go by the details of the carvings and the shape, generally, of the doorways. It's obviously not Gothic, is this? And yet it's not truly Renaissance. The stone for building the church was actually taken from the castle. They dismantled it for the purpose, and it stood on the site where the present railway station is. Once a year I meet Mr. Dale, the chief investigator, who comes up to visit me in the field.
Yes, thank you, Mr. It was very good indeed.
Fine. Is the weather
I'm
good
very
in
glad
London?
to be back in, yes, quite good, but nicer here.
Listing of historic buildings came out of the bomb damage in the last war. It took us 22 years to cover the country the first time round. In our new survey, we have slightly different ideas because standards have changed. On the first occasion, we didn't pay much attention to 19th century buildings, like this station, for instance.
Well, that one's grade 2 already in the existing list.
Yes, a very fine building. A nice later shop front too, and a nice lamp. It's very
A
charming.
good example of a late 19th century one.
Very nice.
And even got a bit of a 19th century ornamental lamp bracket
yes,
on the
it's
side.
very lovely on the corner there.
In addition to its architectural value, it also has the sociological historical interest of being the original home of the Berwick cockles, which are still made there. But this building is more subsidiary and really is only a group between this one and the next, which is a very good building. It probably was grade 3 in the first list, but now we would upgrade it to the statutory list as a link for group value between the better one on each side.
This is a very unusual fanlight. Yes?
The new list will pay much more attention to groups which form the street picture. In a town like Berwick-on-Tweed, a street like Ravensdown can be listed as a whole. For consistency of standards throughout the whole country, the 19 investigators worked direct to me. The new list will probably amount to 200,000 buildings. Their condition is not taken into account at the time of listing because this prejudges the issue. We realize that not all these buildings can be preserved, but they all have claims for preservation, and if an owner wishes to alter or demolish them, he must make his case for so doing to the local planning authority, or in the case of the best buildings, to the Secretary of State. And what we're aiming to do is to protect 200,000 buildings with minimal governmental action and grants of £1 million a year for the best of them. The French system is quite different. They only classified 26,000 buildings, and out of these, 11,000 receive half the cost of maintenance. What they do is done extremely well, but it still leaves a very large proportion of their historic heritage completely unprotected.
Tramping up and down the streets in all weathers and taking notes, standing on one leg in the street, and coming home and all the typing and then the work in London, which has been done by the administrative and clerical people there. And there's a lovely satisfaction in seeing the completion of this work. This book is a culmination of effort over very many months, and a lot of work has been put into it. And yet I'm perfectly happy not to have my name in it. To me, the greatest satisfaction is when I see a building which has served many generations of people, and perhaps it's fallen on poor days, and then some new owner has taken over, and it's taken on a new lease of life, and the building is there for centuries to come, probably, and I feel I've played my own little part in that, a little anonymous part.